Agatha Raisin and the Vanishing Lover of Mayfair. Welcome to the gentle charm of the Cotswolds, where teapots are always warm and secrets have a way of lingering. We'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Drop a note in the comments below. And if cozy mysteries are your evening companion, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us bring the next case straight to you. Now, shall we dive in? Chapter 1. A Whisper in the Rain. Agatha Raisin trudged up the winding lane toward her castle cottage, the hem of her coat dampened by the persistent drizzle. The village was hushed, save for the occasional drip of water from slate roofs and the distant clatter of a milk cart rattling along cobbled streets. The soft glow of lamp posts reflected off the slick pavement, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to dance with the rhythm of the rain. Agatha pulled her scarf tighter, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and exhaled a contented sigh. There was something deeply soothing about the familiar path, the smell of wet earth mingling with the faint aroma of burning wood from chimney stacks. It felt like coming home to a world untouched by the clamour of London. As she reached her front door, her eyes caught a small, unusual shape near the letterbox. At first, she thought it might be another rain-soaked advertisement, discarded and limp against the polished brass. But something about it made her pause. The envelope was unmarked, slightly damp at the corners, and its paper was heavier than ordinary correspondence. Agatha bent down, brushing a droplet of water off its surface, and examined it more closely. There was no sender's name, no official stamp, just a faint impression of handwriting that hinted at elegance and discretion. Curiosity prickled at the edges of her mind. Back inside, Agatha set the envelope on the kitchen table, where the warm glow from the hanging lamp made the paper seem almost luminous. The kettle whistled in the background, steam curling upward like tiny ghostly fingers. She poured herself a cup of tea, the rich scent of Earl Grey mingling with the dampness still clinging to her coat. With one careful motion, she slit the envelope open and unfolded the letter within. The words, written in a flowing script, hinted at a secret meeting and a lover who had vanished without explanation. No name was given, no location was specified, save for a vague reference to Mayfair. Agatha felt a familiar tingle of excitement mixed with caution. Who had sent this? And why her? Her mind, ever alert to the peculiar and mysterious, began cataloguing possibilities, turning over names and faces she had encountered in recent days. There had been a man in Mayfair, yes, an enigmatic figure at a gallery opening who had watched her with a curiosity that bordered on intensity. Could he be connected to this letter? And what of the vanishing lover? The phrasing suggested scandal, or at least a story far more tangled than a casual acquaintance might reveal. Agatha sipped her tea, letting the warmth soothe her racing thoughts. But the questions refused to settle. Outside, the rain continued its gentle tapping against the window pane, a rhythmic accompaniment to her mulling. It was intimate, almost conspiratorial, as if the weather itself was sharing in the secret. Castle's quiet charm contrasted sharply with the glittering, sometimes ruthless streets of Mayfair, and yet tonight those two worlds felt inextricably linked by this small piece of paper. Agatha arranged the letter on the table and leaned back, her mind already scheming the next steps. A mystery had arrived at her door, unsolicited and enigmatic, promising intrigue and a challenge her curiosity could not resist. The evening deepened, shadows lengthening across the kitchen floor, and Agatha Raisin, with a faint smile and sharpened interest, allowed herself to imagine the threads she might unravel. A vanished lover, a secret meeting, and the faintest whisper of danger. Everything was in place for an adventure that would pull her far beyond the comforting walls of her cottage. Agatha Raisin sat by the window, the rain still drumming a gentle rhythm against the glass, and allowed her mind to wander back to Mayfair. It had been only a week ago, yet the memory remained vivid, etched with the clarity of a sharply focused photograph. She remembered the wide, polished streets, the elegant storefronts gleaming under evening lights, and the discreet bustle of well-dressed passers-by, each seemingly absorbed in their own delicate dramas. But one detail had stood out. A man, leaning casually against a wrought-iron fence outside a gallery, his gaze fixed on her with a curious intensity that had made her both uneasy and intrigued. He had been tall, impeccably dressed in a dark overcoat, the collar turned up against a crisp spring breeze. His hat, slightly tilted, shadowed his features just enough to preserve anonymity, yet not enough to hide the glint of awareness in his eyes. Agatha recalled the faint, almost imperceptible scent of expensive tobacco mixed with something floral, a combination that lingered in the memory like a whisper she could not quite place. She had brushed it off at the time, attributing her unease to the nerves of navigating unfamiliar streets, but now, in the cosy comfort of Carsley, the memory seemed charged with a new significance. Her thoughts returned to the letter. The elegant script hinting at a secret meeting. A lover vanished. The connections formed themselves quietly, almost conspiratorially, in her mind. Could this be the same man she had glimpsed in Mayfair? The subtle details, the rare fragrance, the distinctive cut of his coat, the understated glint of a signet ring, were suddenly clues, fragments of a puzzle she felt compelled to solve. Her curiosity, already piqued by the anonymous note, now surged with the thrill of recognition, as if she were standing at the threshold of a story that had been quietly unfolding around her. Agatha picked up the letter again, turning it over in her hands. The words seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim light, suggesting layers of meaning she could not yet decipher. She imagined the streets of Mayfair at dusk, lamps flickering along polished pavements, carriages passing by with hushed elegance, and the subtle undercurrent of intrigue that ran beneath the city's genteel surface. It was a world apart from the gentle hills and quiet cottages of Carsley, yet now it felt intimately connected to her own life, bridged by the mysterious letter and the man whose presence had lingered in her mind. A sense of determination settled over her, warm and steady like the cup of tea she had abandoned on the table. She would return to Mayfair, retrace her steps, and see if the shadows could be coaxed into revealing their secrets. Perhaps the stranger had noticed her, or perhaps the letter was the first step in a chain of events she was meant to follow. The idea of stepping back into the city's glittering but guarded spaces sparked a quiet thrill. She knew she would need caution, observation, and her sharpest instincts, but the prospect of uncovering a hidden narrative thrilled her in a way that few other adventures could. Agatha leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing thoughtfully, a faint smile playing on her lips. The rain continued to fall, soft and insistent, tapping out a rhythm that mirrored her rising anticipation. In her mind, the mystery was already beginning to take shape, a vanishing lover, a clandestine observer, and a letter that had arrived as if guided by some unseen hand. Carsley might be tranquil, but the story had drawn her outward toward Mayfair's glittering streets and the secrets hidden behind its polished facades. She would find answers. She had no choice but to try. Chapter 2. A Meeting at Dusk. The second message arrived in the morning, slipping silently through Agatha Raisin's letterbox like a whisper she was meant to hear. Its envelope was cream-coloured, unmarked, and sealed with a delicate dab of crimson wax. The handwriting was the same as before, elegant, flowing, and precise, and the words inside were short, almost cryptic. "Meet me at Leighton Cafe, Mayfair, at dusk. Come alone. Answers await." Agatha reread the note twice, feeling the familiar spark of intrigue that always accompanied such mysterious summons. She balanced curiosity with caution, making mental notes of exits, nearby streets, and the kind of cafe she might encounter in London's more discreet neighbourhoods. By late afternoon, she was ready. She dressed in her usual careful style, a teal coat that contrasted softly with the muted hues of autumn, a scarf tucked neatly around her neck, and her practical yet polished boots. Her bag contained essentials, a small notebook, pen, and a compact umbrella. As she stepped outside, the sky had begun its slow descent toward evening, casting a warm, honeyed glow across the village streets. Castle, though familiar and comforting, already felt like a different world from the bustling elegance of Mayfair she was about to re-enter. Walking briskly toward the train station, Agatha noticed small signs along the way that made her mind tingle with anticipation. A black umbrella, abandoned and leaning against a lamppost, caught her eye. Its handle was slightly worn, a subtle detail that made her wonder if it had been left intentionally. A shop window displayed a half-burnt candle, the wick still glowing faintly as if it had just been extinguished. These minor curiosities, ordinary objects out of place, felt like breadcrumbs, leading her along a trail she could not yet read. Teasing her sense of anticipation, arriving in Mayfair, Agatha moved with measured awareness, keeping a watchful eye on the pedestrians. She noted a tall man in a long coat who seemed to appear at every intersection, lingering for just long enough to suggest observation before disappearing around a corner. Whether coincidence or design she could not tell, but it kept her senses sharp, her detective instincts fully alert. She entered the quiet cafe, its exterior unassuming, a small brass sign swinging gently in the evening breeze. Inside, the aroma of freshly ground coffee and pastries mingled with faint hints of vanilla and cinnamon, soothing the tension coiling in her chest. A helpful barista greeted her with a warm, practiced smile, offering the usual pleasantries as if she were a familiar customer. Agatha found a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and the street beyond. She tucked her notebook beside her cup, allowing her eyes to roam. Patrons whispered quietly over steaming beverages, their low murmur providing a comforting, cocoon-like backdrop for her watchfulness. Yet not all attention was benign. A man in a dark coat lingered near the counter, glancing around as if measuring the room. A subtle sense of caution mingled with her excitement. This mystery carried a hint of danger, even in such a cozy setting. Dusk deepened outside, the city lights beginning to shimmer on wet pavements and polished window panes. Agatha sipped her tea, letting the warmth settle into her shoulders, and allowed herself a moment of calm reflection. The ordinary elements around her, the cafe, the barista, the glow of lamplight, formed a contrast to the extraordinary task ahead. Every detail mattered, the angle of a glance, the placement of objects, the faintest hint of scent or sound. Somewhere among these subtle cues, the vanishing lover's presence, or at least the next step toward uncovering the truth, was waiting. Agatha leaned back slightly in her chair, her eyes scanning the street as shadows lengthened, preparing herself for the meeting that promised answers, yet might demand careful observation. The quiet tension of the evening wrapped around her like a velvet cloak, reminding her that adventure, curiosity, and discovery often arrived in the smallest, most unexpected ways. Agatha Raisin stepped lightly along the narrow alley that led from the main thoroughfare to Leighton Cafe, the damp stones reflecting the last glow of dusk. The familiar clatter of London traffic seemed distant here, muffled by the close walls of brick and wrought iron. She adjusted her scarf and glanced behind her, almost casually, only to notice a shadow falling in rhythm with her own. A man, tall and lean, moved a few paces back, hands tucked into his coat pockets, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his face. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her stride even, careful not to betray the awareness that her instincts had already sounded. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was he simply another pedestrian lost in the winding streets of Mayfair, or someone with a more deliberate interest in her movements? Agatha had learned to trust her intuition, and it rarely led her astray. She slowed slightly, pretending to adjust her handbag, and noted subtle cues, the soft scrape of polished shoes on cobblestones, the occasional tilt of his head as if listening, the faint glimmer of a signet ring catching the last light. Each detail sharpened the suspicion gnawing at her curiosity. This stranger might know more than he let on. As the alley bent sharply, Agatha ducked behind a stack of wooden crates, pressing herself against the wall. The man passed by, slow and deliberate, giving no sign that he had noticed her disappearance from sight. A small, almost imperceptible exhale of relief escaped her lips. Yet the encounter left her unsettled, the faint thrill of danger coiling through her. Whoever this was, he was connected, directly or indirectly, to the mystery of the vanishing lover. The stakes felt larger now, stretching beyond mere romantic intrigue into murkier, more perilous territory. Emerging from the shadowed alley, Agatha stepped onto a small side street that opened into the warmer lights of the cafe-lined boulevard. Her boots clicked against the pavement, a rhythm that felt like reassurance. She scanned the surroundings, noting the amber glows spilling from windows and the faint chatter of patrons moving indoors. The city had shifted, the tension of the alley replaced with the soft hum of evening activity. It was a delicate balance of cozy and suspenseful, the perfect stage for secrets to linger in plain sight. At last, she reached the unassuming brass sign of Leighton Cafe. A bell chimed softly as she pushed open the door, the rich aroma of coffee and baked goods immediately enveloping her senses. The interior was modest but warm, the walls lined with dark oak and framed sketches of Mayfair scenes. Patrons huddled in quiet conversation, and the barista behind the counter offered a practiced nod as Agatha's gaze swept across the room. And then she saw him, or perhaps she thought she did, a figure seated in the corner, partially obscured by a stack of newspapers, tilted slightly to watch the door. There was a familiarity in the posture, a sense of quiet observation that set Agatha's nerves on alert. He could be the informant mentioned in the letter, or perhaps another puzzle entirely, a man whose motives were yet unreadable. The curiosity that had carried her from Carsley to Mayfair now surged with new intensity. Agatha moved toward the table, her steps measured, mind alert to every detail, the slight rustle of newspapers, the faint scent of tobacco lingering in the air, the way a shadow shifted with a passing waiter. This was more than a casual meeting. It was a careful dance between revelation and caution, a blend of cozy environment and subtle suspense that promised answers without revealing them outright. The adventure she had anticipated was quietly, insistently beginning. Chapter 3. Clues Over Tea. Agatha Raisin settled into the corner of the cafe, the soft murmur of conversation around her, a comforting backdrop to the tension coiling in her chest. Across the small, round table sat Eleanor Whitby, a young socialite whose nervous fingers toyed with the edge of her napkin. Eleanor's wide eyes darted toward the door, and then back at Agatha, as if every passer-by might be an intruder or a messenger. Despite the anxious energy, there was an elegance in her posture, a hint of sophistication that spoke of Mayfair circles and whispered scandals. "Thank you for meeting me," Eleanor said softly, her voice barely above the hum of the cafe. She glanced around once more before leaning in, lowering her tone even further. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Agatha offered a reassuring smile, pouring herself a cup of tea from the small pot at her side. Steam rose in gentle spirals, curling around her senses in a way that grounded her. "Curiosity has its advantages," she said lightly, "and a sense of discretion can be quite satisfying when used properly." Her tone carried both warmth and authority, a subtle invitation for Eleanor to share without fear. The socialite exhaled sharply and began, carefully, as though each word might tip the delicate balance of secrecy. She spoke of a lover who had vanished from the glittering streets of Mayfair, a man whose appearances were fleeting and whose presence was felt more in rumours than in sight. There were late-night rendezvous in candle-lit apartments, strange gifts left anonymously, and fleeting whispers at private soirees. Each fragment of information was delicate, almost too fragile to hold on to, yet Agatha caught the subtle patterns forming in her mind, piecing together what Eleanor revealed with her usual meticulous attention. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she poured her own tea, spilling a drop that Agatha quickly dabbed with a napkin. A shared laugh arose from the minor mishap, the tension easing momentarily. In that brief moment of normality, the cozy charm of the cafe and the warmth of human interaction softened the edges of suspense, making the looming mystery all the more tantalizing. Eleanor continued, offering details in small, fragmented bursts. An unusual silk scarf left at a gallery, the faint scent of sandalwood that seemed to follow the man, a carriage observed idling near an unmarked street. Each clue was a thread, delicate yet strong, weaving a tapestry that Agatha could begin to follow. Yet, even as the story unfolded, Agatha noted inconsistencies, tiny fractures in Eleanor's narrative that hinted at hidden truths or perhaps forgotten details. The socialite's memory faltered in places. A street name shifted slightly, a timeline wavered. Such minor slips were tantalizing for an inquisitive mind like Agatha's. They suggested a reality larger and more complex than the initial story, teasing the edges of a mystery that promised depth and subtle intrigue. The tea grew cold in the warmth of conversation. Unnoticed as Agatha leaned in, her interest fully engaged. Eleanor's words painted a picture of a man whose motives were opaque, whose movements were almost ghost-like, and whose absence was as telling as his presence. It was a dance of information and restraint, of small gestures that spoke louder than explicit statements. The cafe, cozy and intimate, became a stage for secrets whispered over porcelain cups, a quiet battleground of hints and curiosity. By the time Eleanor rose to leave, a sense of purpose had settled over Agatha. She tucked the fragments of the socialite's tale into her mind, aware that each cryptic detail might hold the key to unraveling the mystery. The warmth of tea and human connection had softened the anxiety, leaving behind a steady pulse of curiosity and determination. Somewhere among these whispered stories, the truth of the vanishing lover waited, and Agatha Raisin was ready to seek it. The following morning, Agatha Raisin set out for Mayfair with Eleanor's clues tucked carefully into her notebook. The city streets, already humming with activity, were bathed in a soft golden light that hinted at early autumn. Agatha walked deliberately, scanning facades and shop windows with a practiced eye. Each building, each lamp-post, seemed to whisper secrets if one knew how to listen. Her thoughts traced the socialite's fragmented narrative, sorting through late-night rendezvous, unusual gifts and fleeting whispers, as she tried to match them to real streets and locations. She paused in front of an elegant bookshop, its dark oak facade gleaming in the morning sun. There was a faint aroma of old paper and polished wood that drew her inside. The shop's interior was cozy, narrow, and lined with shelves that climbed toward the high ceiling. Agatha moved among the rows, fingers brushing over spines, scanning titles and noting peculiar details. Her gaze fell on a narrow shelf tucked behind a display of leather-bound journals. A small slip of paper tucked between two volumes caught her attention. It was neatly folded and bore a symbol she had seen before, a delicate crescent entwined with a tiny rose, the same motif that had appeared in the corner of the first anonymous letter. Heart-quickening, Agatha carefully unfolded the note. Its message was brief but precise. Follow the scent of sandalwood. Where shadows gather at dusk, he waits. Her pulse thrummed with excitement. Each element of the note matched pieces of information Eleanor had mentioned, the subtle fragrance, the lingering presence of the mysterious man, the hidden corners of Mayfair streets. It was an invitation, almost playful, challenging her to observe, to think, and to deduce. The familiar mix of thrill and comfort filled her chest. Danger and curiosity were wrapped in the charm of a city she already knew how to navigate with care. Agatha tucked the note into her notebook and continued her exploration, stepping out into a quieter side street. She noticed small, recurring details, a shop window displaying a half-burnt candle, a wrought iron gate slightly ajar, a narrow alley veiled in shadow that resonated with the letter's instructions. Each landmark felt like a breadcrumb, guiding her path with subtlety rather than force. She allowed herself to slow her pace, savoring the detective-like satisfaction of discovery. The process was quiet, almost meditative, an exercise in attention, observation, and deduction. Passing a small cafe tucked between two high-end boutiques, she noted a faint aroma of spices drifting through the doorway. It reminded her of Eleanor's mention of late-night rendezvous, adding another layer to the puzzle. Agatha paused to scribble notes in her book, cross-referencing street names, scents, and symbols. She felt the thrill of progress. The invisible threads of Mayfair society were beginning to reveal themselves, a delicate web connecting shadowed alleys, elegant facades and secret messages. By mid-morning, Agatha had mapped a tentative route, each clue aligning with her growing understanding of the vanishing lover's patterns. The hidden note, the recurring symbols, and the familiar scents all intertwined, offering a playful, engaging trail that invited her intellect to work. She paused on a small bridge over a quiet canal, letting the sunlight glint off the water as she reviewed her notes. Even in the midst of subtle suspense, there was a soothing rhythm to her investigation, the cozy charm of the streets, the warmth of observation, and the satisfaction of each small victory. Agatha Raisin straightened, inhaling deeply, her eyes glinting with determination. The first trail had been found. The initial puzzle pieces had fallen into place, and the path forward was beginning to take shape. There was a story here, waiting patiently to be unraveled, and she would follow it with care, curiosity, and the quiet joy of a mind fully engaged in the chase. Chapter 4. Evening Revelations. Agatha Raisin approached the Mayfair Gallery with quiet anticipation, the late afternoon sun casting warm golden light across the polished pavement. The gallery's facade was elegant, yet unassuming, its tall windows reflecting a soft glow that invited curiosity rather than intimidation. She stepped inside, the faint click of her boots echoing across the marble floor, and was greeted by the gentle murmur of patrons and the faint scent of linseed oil and varnish from the artworks. The air was calm, but Agatha's senses were alert, trained to detect details that others might overlook. She made her way past a display of abstract canvases, each painted with bold strokes and intricate textures, until she reached a quieter corner near a series of sketch easels. It was here that she noticed a small envelope tucked behind one of the drawing boards, marked with the same elegant symbol she had seen before, a crescent entwined with a tiny rose. Her pulse quickened slightly as she carefully unfolded it. Inside was a folded sketch, roughly drawn yet unmistakably detailed, a man leaning casually against a street lamp, his posture deliberate and poised, the lines of his coat rendered with a tension that suggested familiarity. Beneath the sketch was a single cryptic notation, a date written in the same flowing script as the letters she had received. Agatha's mind immediately began connecting threads. The date could coincide with a social gathering, a gallery opening, or perhaps an unreported engagement in Mayfair society. She examined the sketch with care, noting the subtle hints of environment, a lamp post with a tiny emblem, a faintly sketched shopfront that might reveal the man's habitual haunts. Each detail was a breadcrumb, offering clues that required patience, observation, and deduction. She felt the thrill of discovery, tempered by her methodical approach to piecing together the narrative that seemed to hover just beyond immediate comprehension. A gallery attendant approached, a young man with a nervous smile and an awkward bow. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, glancing at her notebook. Agatha raised an eyebrow but smiled politely. "I'm just admiring these sketches," she said lightly, keeping her tone casual. The attendant leaned closer, whispering with a conspiratorial air. "Some pieces, well, they have stories behind them. Not all are on display for everyone." Agatha nodded thoughtfully, sensing the subtle humour and human warmth in his delivery. He moved off, leaving her to her observations. But the interaction reminded her that even in the most elegant spaces, personalities and quirks could provide both insight and amusement. She studied the date again, committing it to memory, and made a few discreet sketches of her own. mapping connections between social events and the vanishing lover's possible appearances. The gallery felt like a quiet theatre for the unfolding drama, each artwork a potential clue, each passerby a minor character whose gestures and expressions added texture to the story. The coded message, hidden sketch, and cryptic notation provided a perfect blend of visual engagement and intellectual challenge, drawing her deeper into a narrative that was at once suspenseful and invitingly cozy. As the evening light softened, Agatha allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. A new layer of understanding had emerged, one that offered both amusement and the thrill of insight. She tucked the sketch carefully into her notebook, aware that each subtle clue brought her closer to uncovering the truth behind the vanishing lover. The gallery, with its quiet elegance, attentive staff, and hidden messages, had revealed the first tangible evidence of the story she was determined to unravel. Agatha Raisin walked briskly through the streets of Mayfair, her notebook tucked securely under her arm. The fading evening light cast a warm glow across the polished pavements, but her thoughts were preoccupied, restless. Earlier, she had returned to a familiar location hinted at in the coded messages, a narrow lane she thought might conceal another fragment of the vanishing lover's trail. Yet when she arrived, the carefully placed note she had expected to find was gone. The spot was empty, the subtle crescent and rose symbol nowhere in sight. A flicker of disappointment crossed her face. Her first tangible lead had vanished, leaving only the lingering sense of a mystery slipping just beyond reach. She paused on the quiet street, surveying the scene as if it might suddenly reveal itself. The absence of the clue was almost more disconcerting than a threat. It introduced uncertainty, an invisible opponent whose motives were as elusive as the man she sought. Agatha sighed softly, the sound mingling with the distant murmur of evening traffic. She reflected on her steps. Had she been too obvious? Too hasty? Or was it simply the unpredictable nature of pursuing a secret that thrived in shadows? Each thought weighed lightly on her curiosity. Blending frustration with fascination, deciding to regroup, Agatha retraced her steps toward a nearby cafe she knew well, its modest sign swinging gently in the evening breeze. Inside, the familiar scent of freshly ground coffee and baked pastries enveloped her, a comforting counterpoint to the tension still prickling at her mind. She chose a corner table, close enough to observe the street through tall windows, and settled into a chair, allowing the warmth of the room to ease her thoughts. A steaming cup of Earl Grey was placed before her by a cheerful barista who offered a friendly nod and a fleeting remark about the chill outside. The simple act of being served, the hum of quiet conversation around her, grounded Agatha, reminding her that even in the midst of mystery, life carried small, soothing routines. She sipped her tea and opened her notebook, reviewing each clue she had gathered. Symbols, scents, gestures, and fleeting sightings formed a puzzle she could almost visualize. Yet one piece had clearly slipped from her grasp. The trail had gone cold, and with it came the sharp edge of anticipation, an almost tangible urging to press forward, to question, to observe with even greater care. She reflected on the patterns retracing Eleanor's words, the sketches and the subtle landmarks she had noted earlier. Even in this temporary pause, Agatha's mind worked quietly, turning each fragment over, allowing the seemingly minor details to reveal potential insights. A small smile tugged at her lips as she allowed herself a moment of perspective. Though the clue was gone, the narrative had not ended. The absence itself was a signal, a reminder that the game was ongoing and that the vanishing lover's story remained just out of reach. She noted subtle foreshadowings, the faint whiff of sandalwood still present on a passing pedestrian, the hint of a candle's glow in a distant window, and allowed herself to feel both patience and determination. By the time Agatha finished her tea, the tension had softened into a quiet, reflective resolve. The streets outside were darker now, lamplight spilling softly onto the pavements, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The missing note had introduced suspense, but it had also reinforced her engagement with the mystery. She would return, observe, and patiently follow each hint, knowing that even in a temporary dead end, the path forward remained, waiting for discovery and insight. Chapter 5. Moonlit Clues. The tip arrived in the form of a brief, unmarked note, slipped under Agatha Raisin's cottage door. Midnight. Courtyard behind Langford House. Come alone. She read it twice, the crisp handwriting sending a familiar shiver of anticipation down her spine. Midnight rendezvous were rarely mundane, and Agatha had learned that messages like this demanded both caution and curiosity. She dressed in her dark teal coat, chose low, quiet shoes, and tucked her notebook and pen securely into her bag. A scarf wrapped snugly around her neck offered both warmth and a shield against the night's chill. The streets of Mayfair at midnight were hushed. The usual hum of the city softened into whispers and distant echoes. Street lamps cast pools of golden light, while the shadows between them stretched long and secretive. Agatha moved cautiously, her eyes scanning alleyways, doorways, and the subtle movements of the few late-night pedestrians. The cobbled streets gleamed faintly under the residual moisture from an earlier drizzle, reflecting lamplight like a scattered constellation. Each step heightened the intimacy of the night, the quiet creating an almost conspiratorial space between her and the city. She reached the courtyard, tucked behind a discreet wrought-iron gate, and paused. A faint rustle came from the far corner, accompanied by the soft clink of metal. Her pulse quickened, and she drew her coat tighter, letting instinct guide her movements. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and lean, his features partially obscured by the brim of a hat and a scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. Agatha's eyes narrowed, taking in subtle details, the faint scent of sandalwood, a polished signet ring glinting in the moonlight, the careful, measured steps that suggested familiarity with secrecy. Agatha Raisin? The voice was low, cautious, yet deliberate. Yes, she replied, keeping her tone steady. I received your message. The figure inclined his head, gestures precise and careful. I know you're curious, he said, and you have a knack for observation. I won't waste your time. There are matters surrounding the vanished gentleman, affairs beyond what you've been told. But not everything can be said openly. Agatha listened intently, her mind piecing together the hints. He spoke of meetings cloaked in discretion, unusual exchanges, and whispered rumours that hinted at the vanished lover's entanglements within Mayfair society, circles of wealth, influence, and subtle intrigue. Each phrase was measured, carefully balancing revelation with ambiguity, leaving her to discern which details were truth, which were misdirection, and which were simply atmosphere meant to engage her curiosity. The courtyard felt alive with subtle sounds, the distant clatter of a carriage, the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a light breeze, the echo of Agatha's boots on the cobblestones. Moonlight bathed the scene in silver hues, painting both the figure and surrounding architecture with a delicate, almost cinematic glow. There was a suspended intimacy in the night, a sense that secrets could be both shared and protected under the cloak of darkness. The figure stepped back slightly, fading toward the shadows. Follow the threads carefully, he murmured. You'll see more than you expect, but not everything is safe to touch. His words lingered, cryptic yet charged with promise before he vanished, leaving only the gentle night sounds and Agatha's racing thoughts. Alone in the courtyard, Agatha Raisin exhaled softly, allowing herself to feel both the thrill of discovery and the weight of caution. The vanishing lover's story had taken another subtle turn, each hint layering intrigue upon curiosity. She straightened, determined to follow the threads laid before her, aware that the night had revealed both possibilities and peril, and that the next step in her investigation would require patience, observation, and her usual keen judgment. Agatha Raisin left the quiet courtyard with a renewed sense of purpose, the night air cool against her cheeks. The streets of Mayfair seemed different now, alive with secrets she was determined to uncover. Her eyes moved deliberately, noting shadows, lampposts, and subtle markers that might point toward the vanishing lover's path. Each step felt measured, a quiet rhythm in the soft hum of the city at midnight. Cobblestones glistened under the moonlight, reflecting her thoughts as she pieced together the hints left in Eleanor's notes and the mysterious sketch. She passed a small alley where the faint scent of sandalwood lingered in the air, the aroma drawing a memory of the midnight informant's warning. The familiar fragrance stirred something within her, a thread that seemed to tie past clues to the present. Leaning casually against a shopfront, she glimpsed a folded corner of paper poking from a crevice in the doorframe. Her pulse quickened as she retrieved it, a tiny handwritten note marked again with the crescent and rose symbol. Inside, a cryptic message hinted at the next rendezvous point, a small garden courtyard nestled between two Georgian townhouses. Agatha followed the directions with careful attention, noting recurring motifs along the way. A scarf, similar to the one described in Eleanor's tale, fluttered briefly from a window, a subtle confirmation that she was on the right trail. A brass plaque outside a rare bookshop bore a faint engraving that mirrored one she had seen in the first hidden note, a quiet breadcrumb guiding her path. Each detail, mundane yet distinct, reinforced her conviction that the vanishing lover was weaving a subtle map through the city, intentionally or not, leaving patterns for those observant enough to notice. The streets were not entirely deserted. A vendor selling roasted chestnuts called softly from his cart, his words carried with warmth and friendliness. "Evening, madam. Care for a warm one?" Agatha accepted a single chestnut, savouring its comforting heat and the faint sweetness of caramelized skin. The human touch, the small interactions along her journey, grounded her in the cozy reality of the city, a gentle counterpoint to the tension of her investigation. Each smile and courteous nod reinforced the balance between suspense and familiarity, reminding her that even the most intricate mysteries unfolded amid ordinary, comforting details. Finally, she arrived at the secluded garden courtyard, a quiet haven framed by ivy-covered walls and a central fountain glimmering faintly in the moonlight. She knelt briefly beside the fountain, observing the water's subtle movement, the delicate shadows cast by wrought-iron fencing. A small engraving at the fountain's base mirrored the recurring symbols she had noted on the hidden notes and sketches. Agatha traced her fingers over the etched crescent and rose, a tangible connection to the vanishing lover's path. It was the quiet satisfaction of discovery, the sense that she was beginning to see the outlines of a larger, hidden narrative. The city night remained alive with subtle sounds, distant footsteps echoing off narrow streets, the whisper of leaves in a gentle breeze, and the faint hum of a carriage moving along polished pavements. Each element blended the suspense of her detective work with the comforting rhythm of urban life, creating a balance that was both engaging and cozy. Agatha's notebook was already filling with observations, sketches, and connections, each discovery building upon the last, forming a tapestry of subtle intrigue. Standing at the fountain, Agatha Raisin allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. She had followed the vanishing lover's trail through shadowed streets, rare shop marks, and moonlit courtyards, and each step had brought her closer to understanding the man whose absences had prompted curiosity and concern alike. The night was still young, and the mystery remained alive, but with each subtle clue, the picture grew clearer, promising new revelations and the continued thrill of discovery. Chapter 6. Secrets Behind Closed Doors. Agatha Raisin paused in the shadowed Mayfair lane, her eyes fixed on a narrow door set between two elegant townhouses. It was unremarkable at first glance. Its faded paint and plain brass handle betrayed nothing of the secrets it might conceal, but subtle details drew her attention. A faint crescent and rose symbol, etched almost imperceptibly into the corner of a mail slot, confirmed her suspicions. This was no ordinary residence. Her pulse quickened with the familiar thrill of discovery, the promise of a clue hidden just beyond reach. She approached carefully, ears tuned to the soft hum of the city at dusk. The street was quiet, the occasional footsteps of a passing pedestrian echoing off the pavement. Agatha crouched slightly and leaned forward, noticing that the door was ajar just enough to offer a glimpse inside. Her eyes adjusted to the dim interior, where warm lamplight cast long, soft shadows across the floorboards. The apartment felt lived in, but deliberately private, a space designed to be seen only by those invited, or by those clever enough to notice its hidden entrance. Inside, a modest sitting room revealed the personal habits of a meticulous occupant. Letters lay in neat stacks on a polished writing desk, their envelopes sealed with care, some bearing symbols and handwriting she recognized from previous notes. A leather-bound diary rested nearby, its cover worn and inviting, as if quietly daring her to uncover its secrets. On a small chair, a single, elegant glove had been left behind, delicate and pristine, a silent trace of someone who had vanished into the city without leaving a sound. Each item held a story, a fragment of life meant to remain private, yet now tantalizingly exposed. Agatha's fingers itched with the desire to examine each artifact, but she knew caution was necessary. Every letter, every entry in the diary could provide insight into the vanishing lover's identity and motives. Her eyes lingered on a particular envelope, slightly crumpled, its seal partially broken. Carefully, she lifted it, noting the elegant script within. Each line seemed to hint at clandestine meetings, carefully timed absences, and small mysteries woven into daily life. The glove, positioned so deliberately, suggested a narrative as personal as it was mysterious, a signature of presence and absence that demanded interpretation. She allowed herself a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. This was the sort of discovery that combined the cozy thrill of familiarity with the intellectual satisfaction of puzzle-solving. Agatha imagined the vanished lover's life unfolding within these walls, the careful organization of letters, the precise attention to small objects, and the subtle patterns of behavior that now served as a trail for her keen observation. Each visual detail, from the polished desk to the lone glove, was a clue waiting to be read, a fragment of a story that would gradually reveal itself to a patient and curious mind. The apartment, though intimate and private, seemed to breathe a gentle suspense. Shadows from the lamp flickered across the walls, brushing against framed sketches, and a few stray books that hinted at broader interests. Agatha traced a finger lightly over the diary's leather spine, feeling the weight of stories, yet unread. The promise of revelations that would only make sense when connected with the letters and previous clues. Every item suggested that the vanishing lover had been deliberate in both action and concealment, leaving traces designed to be discovered by someone observant enough to notice. Reluctantly, Agatha straightened, stepping back to leave the apartment undisturbed for the moment. She had gleaned enough to fuel her investigation, and a notebook full of observations, each piece reinforcing her understanding of the lover's movements and intentions. The warmth of the room, the intimacy of the objects, and the thrill of subtle discovery combined to create a moment both suspenseful and cozy. Outside, the city waited quietly, promising that the next steps in her pursuit of the vanishing lover would continue to unfold with the same intrigue and quiet delight that had brought her here. Agatha Raisin lingered near the doorway of the hidden apartment, her mind alive with the possibilities suggested by the letters, diary, and lone glove. She was about to step back into the Mayfair evening when a soft, irregular cough startled her. Turning, she discovered a woman peering from behind a nearby window, her hair an unkempt tangle, and a bright floral scarf wrapped haphazardly around her neck. The woman's eyes sparkled with curiosity, and she gave a little wave, almost apologetic, but undeniably eager for attention. "Well, you're not one of the usual postmen," the woman said in a voice both sharp and whimsical, stepping out onto the pavement. "And you don't look like a delivery girl. May I inquire what brings a sensible, well-dressed lady like yourself to this forsaken corridor at such an hour?" Agatha raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Curiosity, primarily," she replied, "and perhaps a sense of necessity. May I ask who you are?" "Oh, I'm Mildred Penrose," the woman declared, straightening an imaginary crown on her head. "I live 2 floors up. Some call me eccentric, others mysterious, and, on rare occasions, I know things that others do not." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I've observed movements, patterns, and, dare I say, absences. Certain people in this building, some very polished, some exceedingly cautious, leave clues whether they intend to or not." Agatha's interest was immediately piqued. Mildred's eyes danced with a mix of humour and authority, her eccentricity tempered by undeniable perceptiveness. "I'm investigating a resident here," Agatha said, choosing her words carefully. "A man whose presence has been sporadic. Have you noticed anything unusual?" Mildred hummed thoughtfully and tapped her chin. "Unusual? Oh, my dear, that is an understatement. There are times when doors remain slightly ajar, papers misplaced, or shadows flicker where none should. And some of these absences are deliberate, not accidental. I have seen a certain gentleman slipping away in the evening, leaving behind objects of interest, gloves, notes, the occasional peculiar book. Quite the performance, I must admit." She tilted her head, eyeing Agatha keenly. "Follow the pattern of his comings and goings, the small signals others overlook. That is where the truth hides." Agatha nodded, mentally cataloguing Mildred's words. The eccentric neighbour's observations confirmed her own suspicions. The vanishing lover's behaviour was more calculated than she had first imagined. Each departure, each carefully placed object, hinted at motives far more complex than a mere romantic intrigue. Agatha could feel the thread of the larger story beginning to unravel in her mind, even as the specifics remained tantalizingly out of reach. "Thank you," Agatha said, a genuine warmth in her tone. "Your insight is invaluable." Mildred smiled broadly, flourishing her scarf dramatically. "Do not thank me yet, my dear. Mayfair has a way of hiding its most interesting stories behind the quietest facades. Watch carefully, listen attentively, and never underestimate a seemingly insignificant shadow. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the loudest truths." She waved a hand as if casting a spell, then retreated toward her apartment, leaving Agatha alone with the echoes of her cryptic advice. Standing in the dimly lit corridor, Agatha Raisin felt a renewed sense of purpose. Mildred's eccentric yet perceptive observations had added another layer to the investigation. Every letter, symbol, and unusual object now connected to a broader, more intricate narrative. The vanishing lover's disappearance, she realized, was a puzzle woven with subtlety, and every insight, no matter how playful or unconventional, was a clue that could guide her toward understanding. With a deep breath, she adjusted her coat and stepped back into the streets of Mayfair, ready to follow the trail wherever it might lead. Chapter 7. Twilight Confrontations. Agatha Raisin had wandered along the winding paths of Mayfair Park, the last traces of sunlight casting a warm, amber glow over the meticulously trimmed hedges and cobblestone walkways. Twilight softened the city's edges, turning lampposts into quiet sentinels and giving shadows a life of their own. She had come seeking clarity, retracing familiar routes in hopes that the vanishing lover's pattern would reveal itself. When a movement ahead caught her attention, a figure paused beneath an ornate wrought-iron gazebo, half hidden by the delicate boughs of an ornamental cherry tree. Her breath caught, and she slowed, pretending casual curiosity as her gaze met his. It was him, the vanishing lover, tall and composed, yet with an air of nervous tension that betrayed the careful image he presented to the world. His coat was slightly rumpled, scarf fluttering in the evening breeze, and in his hand he clutched a folded letter, partially obscured from view. Agatha's mind, connecting every subtle detail she had gathered so far. The letters, the symbols, the whispers of a hidden life within Mayfair's polished society. "You," she said softly. The word carrying both recognition and restrained astonishment. He turned, eyes widening briefly before masking surprise with a polite, guarded smile. "Miss Raisin," he murmured, voice low, smooth, yet tinged with something unspoken. "I did not expect to see you here." Agatha stepped forward, careful to maintain distance, yet signalling her awareness. "Nor I you," she admitted, "though I suspect our paths were meant to cross. Perhaps you can shed light on certain mysteries?" Her tone was even friendly, yet threaded with subtle insistence. He tilted his head slightly, studying her, the letter in his hand shifting just enough for her to glimpse the elegant script. "Mysteries," he repeated, a trace of amusement in his voice. "And what if some things are meant to remain mysteries? Not all questions yield immediate answers." His glance flickered toward the horizon, where lamplight began to punctuate the encroaching shadows. Agatha noted the small cues, the way his fingers lingered on the letter, the brief hesitation before his words, the nervous tightening of his coat around his shoulders. Each movement suggested both caution and calculation, a deliberate obfuscation meant to test her resolve. She felt the thrill of near revelation, the intoxicating mixture of suspense and curiosity that had carried her through the labyrinth of clues so far. "Then perhaps you will indulge me just a fragment," Agatha pressed gently, allowing a hint of warmth to soften the question. "A detail that might guide my understanding," he sighed softly, leaning against the gazebo rail. "A fragment, yes," he said, finally allowing a glimmer of openness. "But fragments can mislead as easily as they enlighten. Know only that paths intersect, choices have consequences, and some truths are hidden by necessity rather than design." His words hovered in the twilight, cryptic yet charged with meaning, leaving Agatha to interpret their significance. A quiet pause settled between them, broken only by the rustle of leaves and distant footsteps along the park's perimeter. Agatha considered her next move carefully. She could pursue him further, risking confrontation and alarm, or withdraw for now, accumulating more evidence before drawing conclusions. Both options held the promise of revelation, but the decision itself was a test of patience and strategy. Finally, with a polite nod and a measured smile, the vanishing lover retreated into the shadowed paths, leaving Agatha alone beneath the glow of the lanterns. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension ebb and the twilight's calm seep into her senses. The encounter had yielded hints but not clarity, sparking anticipation, suspense, and the quiet satisfaction of being closer to the truth than ever before. Agatha Raisin returned to her cozy castle cottage, the door clicking softly behind her as she shed her coat and scarf. The rain had begun again, gentle taps against the windows providing a comforting rhythm that contrasted with the tension of her Mayfair adventure. She moved deliberately to her favorite armchair by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows across the room. On the small table beside her, a steaming cup of Earl Grey waited, its aroma blending with the faint scent of old books and polished wood. Here, in her familiar sanctuary, Agatha felt both calm and focused, ready to examine the threads she had gathered over countless streets, cafes and shadowed courtyards. She laid out her notes, sketches and letters across the table, organizing them into rough sequences. Each symbol, each recurring motif, the crescent and rose markings, the carefully folded letters, the rare bookshop plaques, was meticulously catalogued. Agatha traced connections with a pen, drawing faint lines between entries, annotating dates and locations. The process was methodical, almost meditative, blending her natural curiosity with the satisfaction of detective work. As she reviewed the sketches of the vanishing lover, the folded notes and Eleanor's hints, a pattern began to emerge. A series of social gatherings in Mayfair, subtle rivalries among acquaintances, and small but telling discrepancies in alibis. Her mind wandered briefly to Mildred Penrose, the eccentric neighbour who had offered cryptic observations. Mildred's remarks about overlooked gestures and subtle departures now resonated with new significance. Agatha noted a connection between the lovers' absences and these social undercurrents, an intricate network of appearances, disappearances, and whispered expectations. The realization sparked both excitement and a quiet respect for the careful orchestration at play. Each clue was a deliberate stroke in a larger painting, and Agatha was gradually beginning to perceive its outlines. Taking a sip of her tea, Agatha allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The warmth of the cup, the familiar comfort of the chair, and the gentle crackle of the fire provided a cozy counterbalance to the intellectual stimulation of her deductions. She reviewed each letter again, focusing on cryptic phrases and partially concealed handwriting. Connections that had seemed trivial before now took on significance. A mention of midnight courtyards aligned with the gazebo encounter. References to specific scents matched those observed in the streets. And the recurring motifs of gloves and symbols suggested deliberate signaling rather than random coincidence. As the evening deepened, Agatha cross-referenced dates, social events and locations in a notebook, her handwriting neat and precise. She paused occasionally to allow ideas to settle, letting intuition guide her reasoning. Patterns emerged, deliberate absences coinciding with social gatherings, subtle indicators of tension between rivals, and the occasional hint of secrecy maintained through carefully placed objects. Each realization was like a small flame, illuminating another corner of the mystery without revealing it completely. Finally, Agatha leaned back, hands resting lightly on her notebook. The pieces were almost aligned. The picture was near completion, yet certain fragments remained elusive, teasing the final revelation. She let herself feel the satisfaction of progress, the gentle thrill of approaching truth, and the comforting presence of her home. The mystery of the vanishing lover was within reach, and the combination of careful deduction, cozy surroundings, and reflective calm had brought her closer than ever. The anticipation of resolution hung quietly in the room, a promise that the next step would finally connect curiosity with revelation. Chapter 8. The Mayfair Revelation. Agatha Raisin arrived at the Mayfair drawing room a little before the appointed hour, carrying her notebook and a quiet sense of anticipation. The room was elegant but inviting, with soft amber lighting, spilling from a chandelier onto polished wooden floors and velvet draperies. Tea was laid out on a small table, delicate porcelain cups balanced beside a silver teapot that reflected the gentle glow. Agatha had orchestrated this meeting carefully, inviting the vanishing lover, Eleanor, and a few other key figures whose observations might illuminate the truth. The air was charged with a mixture of civility and subtle tension, each participant aware that the evening promised revelation. The vanishing lover arrived promptly, his usual composure tempered by a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He glanced around the room, noting the attentive expressions of the others, and nodded politely to Agatha. Eleanor, ever anxious yet determined, fidgeted with her gloves and whispered an apology for her earlier nervousness. Agatha welcomed each with gentle warmth, setting a tone that encouraged honesty while preserving the coziness of the gathering. It was a delicate balance, suspense threaded with comfort, a social performance layered with genuine intent. Agatha began by reviewing the sequence of letters, notes, and symbolic clues, carefully tracing the steps of the vanishing lover across Mayfair. She spoke calmly, inviting input from each participant, allowing them to share observations and small insights. The vanishing lover listened, his gaze occasionally flicking to certain details, confirming some points and reacting subtly to others. Mild exchanges of humour punctuated the recounting. Eleanor's occasional awkward interjections and a wry smile from a minor witness helped to ease tension, reminding everyone that even mysteries could coexist with warmth. Slowly, Agatha wove the narrative together. Hidden motives emerged, social rivalries that had encouraged secrecy, personal obligations that necessitated carefully timed absences, and whispered alliances that had remained invisible to casual observers. The vanishing lover, prompted by Agatha's tactful questioning, revealed the carefully guarded reasons for his disappearance, a mixture of protecting reputations, avoiding scandal, and managing delicate matters in Mayfair society. Each revelation was precise but measured, leaving room for interpretation and reflection. Eleanor's testimony filled in emotional nuances, recounting fleeting gestures, unexplained absences, and subtle hints she had observed during the past weeks. Her nervous demeanor softened as she saw the clarity emerging, her role in the narrative shifting from anxious informant to vital witness. Agatha smiled inwardly, pleased with the gentle unfolding of the story, balancing suspense with the comfort of logical resolution. Finally, the vanishing lover leaned forward slightly, offering a detail that completed the puzzle: the symbolic marks, the carefully placed notes, the midnight rendezvous, all elements of a plan designed to maintain discretion while leaving breadcrumbs for an observant detective. The room absorbed the revelation with a collective exhale. Tension gave way to a mixture of amusement, satisfaction, and light relief. Each character's quirks, Eleanor's anxious energy, the minor witnesses' wry observations, the lover's composed yet subtly nervous demeanor contributed to a layered, humanized resolution. Agatha poured the final cups of tea, the steam curling in the warm lamplight, and allowed a small, triumphant smile. The mystery had been unmasked, the trail of secrets illuminated without harshness or recrimination. The social masks of Mayfair had fallen away, leaving a story of intrigue, discretion, and carefully managed lives. In that moment, the room felt intimate and cozy, despite the suspense that had preceded it, a perfect balance of curiosity fulfilled and emotional satisfaction achieved. Agatha Raisin's journey back to Carsley was quiet, the familiar landscape gradually replacing the polished streets and ornate facades of Mayfair. The train rocked gently beneath her as she reflected on the evening's revelations, the final pieces of the vanishing lover's story falling neatly into place. Each twist and turn through London's elite districts now seemed like a carefully choreographed dance, and Agatha, ever observant, had managed to follow the steps with a mix of intuition and persistence. She allowed herself a small smile, appreciating both the elegance of the city's secrets and the comforting simplicity of her village home. The rain had ceased, leaving a faint, earthy scent that reminded her of long walks along Carsley's winding lanes. By the time she arrived at her cottage, the evening sky was clear, stars beginning to glimmer faintly above the rooftops. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, feeling the warmth and familiarity of her sanctuary embrace her. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting gentle light across the room, and her cat, Mistletoe, padded over with a low, welcoming purr. Agatha set down her bag, brushing off a hint of London chill, and settled into her favourite armchair, Mistletoe curling contentedly on her lap. She poured herself a cup of chamomile tea, inhaling the soothing aroma as she reviewed her notebook one last time. The letters, sketches, and observations from Mayfair now formed a coherent narrative. Loose ends were tied with delicate care. The cryptic notes, the eccentric neighbours' insights, the midnight rendezvous, and the hidden apartment all contributed to a complete understanding of the vanishing lover's motives and actions. Agatha noted the subtleties that had escaped immediate notice, small gestures, understated symbols, and the quiet elegance of discretion that had defined the man's absences. Even as the mystery resolved, Agatha allowed herself to savour the gentle thrill of detective work. Each clue, each subtle revelation had been an invitation to observe closely, to read between the lines of human behavior, and to appreciate the small intricacies that gave life both suspense and charm. She jotted a few final observations in her notebook, careful to preserve the delicate balance between curiosity and resolution, then set it aside with a sense of quiet accomplishment. Outside, the night deepened, the village streets bathed in soft moonlight, shadows stretching in the familiar contours of chimneys, fences, and garden gates. Agatha took a deep breath, letting the calm of Carsley settle over her senses. Mistletoe purred more insistently, and she scratched behind his ears, feeling the simple comfort of companionship. It was a moment of serene reflection, a pause after weeks of intrigue, and yet beneath the calm a subtle awareness lingered, adventure, curiosity, and the gentle pull of mysteries yet to be discovered. She leaned back, eyes tracing the patterns of stars above, letting thoughts drift to Mayfair's ornate streets, the secret messages and the delicate unraveling of hidden lies. There was satisfaction in the resolution, humour in the eccentricities she had encountered, and warmth in knowing that for now the village remained her anchor. Yet she knew that curiosity was a persistent companion, and the world, full of secrets and stories, would always offer new threads to follow. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Agatha Raisin sipped her tea and allowed a contented smile to play across her lips. Cozy, safe, and yet infinitely curious, she was ready to embrace whatever new adventures might arrive at her doorstep. The Vanishing Lover's tale was concluded, but the gentle rhythm of village life, the quiet mysteries hidden in ordinary moments, and the promise of future discoveries ensured that her world remained as inviting, charming, and subtly suspenseful as ever.